Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. We're going to get started in just a moment. We get started right on time. It's 1 o'clock. So I am Mickey Feldman-Simon. I am the founder of I'm Back at Work. I will tell you a little bit more about myself in just a moment. I first of all want to make sure that first, I would like to introduce Sarah Michelle, who will be presenting here today. Before we run into everything else we have to do, Sarah Michelle is here with us today. I'll tell you more about her in just a moment. But first of all, I want to make sure that you can use the webinar panel. So your webinar panel may look like the image on the left where it is expanded, or the image on the right where it is all closed up. And to open or close it, you just click on the orange arrow at the top of it to open or close it. Now, if the webinar panel is now obstructing the view of the presentation, what you do is you click anywhere on the top of the panel, whether it's open or closed, and then you just drag it out of the way. Now, in the last 5 minutes of the webinar, we will have a Q&A session. To ask questions, click on the gray questions bar and then type in your questions in the blue rectangle underneath. And we will address all of your questions at the end of the webinar. If there's something you really didn't understand or something pressing, feel free to ask questions along the way and I will monitor your questions. A little bit about me. So I am the founder of I'm Back at Work and I'm a career and executive coach. I have over 25 years of corporate experience in a variety of roles. I've taken many pivots. I worked as the head of HR, as VP Marketing, VP Operations, Business Development, and I also took multiple career breaks throughout my career, whether to take care of my kids when they were young, to move continents. You hear from my accent, Israeli, Australian, American, and moving back and forth multiple times. And I successfully returned to the workforce after each one of those breaks. And I founded I'm Back at Work with the mission to help women remain in the workforce and return to the workforce. As a coach, I work with people in career transitions on the career coaching, and I work with executives to unlock their full potential. I thrive helping people become a better version of themselves, both personally and professionally. Now, I invited Sarah Michelle here today to speak on the I'm Back at Work platform after hearing her story. Like you and me, Sarah was experiencing imposter syndrome. Yes, many successful people and people who take on new challenges and during transitions feel they doubt themselves. They have that face doubt and experience imposter syndrome. The only difference is, how do you deal with it? So Sarah put the work in to overcome and her fears and grow. And today she will share with us her story and share with you tools how to help you also effectively deal with imposter syndrome. I will now turn my video camera off and pass things on to Sarah. Sarah, thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're calling in from. I am really excited to share a little bit of my story today. I am a brand strategist and what I call an identity evangelist. And so my primary business is HoneyMap, and I work with business owners, helping them figure out who they are and how to tell people. And I'm also the creator and host of the podcast Successful-ish, which I'll be sharing a little bit more about where that came from. And I am sort of in a makeshift online setting, so I am going to be using some notes as I go through, so I appreciate your grace with that. So before I jump in, I want to know if it's okay if I can share a little confession. I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And as I prepared to speak today, I just spent hours writing and retracting dozens of opening lines, trying to find the perfect, profound opening statement or captivating question. And the pressure of success and achievement was keeping me from putting anything on the page. And I relayed this to a friend and they said, Sarah, you're just doing what you always do. You're putting too much pressure on yourself. All you have to do is say, good afternoon. And I said, I can't do that. I need a captivating power statement, something that compels people to scoot to the edge of their seats. And they looked at me and they thought about it for a minute and they said, okay, why don't you open with good afternoon? Would you please scoot to the edge of your seats? Not entirely helpful, but they were kind of right. I know what I'm talking about. I'm well educated on the topics that I speak about, and I have years of expertise to back that education, but I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And the really unfortunate consequence of that is that I sometimes let that fear keep me from doing things. I get this crazy idea in my head that before I can do anything, I have to first be successful at not just that one thing, but every possible related thing. I have to be immune to mistakes, failures, criticism, disappointing others. And then I look around the room I'm in, or I scroll through social media and I see what other people are doing, and I think they're so much better than I am. And they look like they know what they're doing. Maybe I should just let them check this box and I'll just go back to scrolling. Have
Sarah,
any of you ever?
Sarah, I'm going to stop you for one moment. So one person has said that they can't hear, and I would just love to hear from everybody else if Carol's the only one who can't hear, and if everybody else can hear, Sarah could hear myself. So I'd love in the question area, okay, I'm getting, I can hear, thank you, Courtney, thank you, other people. So they can hear, they can see. So Carol, I would just suggest that you go back and try and log in and test your sound. Sorry, Sarah, for interrupting you. I just want to make sure
It's
everybody
okay.
else can hear us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to know if any of you have ever experienced this. If you've ever experienced that feeling of disqualifying yourself from something that you wanted to do. And I want to talk about how to talk to this voice, not how to get rid of it, because this voice is not going anywhere. And that voice that tells us that we can't do something or we don't belong is often referred to as imposter syndrome. And this has sort of become a buzzword over the last couple years. I'm not sure who is familiar with this term, but imposter syndrome is essentially a psychological term that refers to a pattern of behavior where people doubt their accomplishments and have a persistent, often internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. So you can think about it as being invited to a party, but feeling like you don't belong, even though you received the invitation. And there's some really interesting research on this. While the word syndrome would imply that this is a rare sickness that only a few unfortunates catch, it's actually a universal affliction. And while you would think that the cure to this would be found in success and achievement, research actually shows the opposite, that the more success we have in life, the more loudly we experience imposter syndrome. So if you hear this voice loudly, congratulations, you must be super successful. There is some good news. While there's no cure to this syndrome, research also suggests that sharing our experiences with imposter syndrome can reduce those feelings of doubt and anxiety and can inspire others to press forward through their fears and doubts. So today I'm going to share some of my internal conversations and experiences with imposter syndrome. And to be honest, I avoided sharing my personal story because it's raw and not super flattering, but it's real. And the research suggests that that is the best way to help other people conquer this syndrome. And so that is what I'm going to do. And my hope is that in sharing my story, you'll leave today feeling encouraged that you're not the only person who experiences this syndrome. You'll realize you're more successful than you think you are, and you'll take away a few practical strategies to help you do more things without disqualifying yourself. So I started my business Honey Map a few years ago as a hobby, and after several years in ad agency and corporate culture, I was ready to step off the corporate ladder and focus on family. I was married at the time and in the early stages of family planning, and my husband and I decided to pursue an adoption, something I'd always wanted to do, and decided that during the 1 to 2 years of the adoption process, I would leave my high salaried Boston job and create a fun hobby business that could keep my brain creatively engaged while I raised our baby. It was fun and exciting. I got to be creative without any pressure because I had the luxury of my husband's income, and I created Honey Map as a hobby and really never planned on it being anything beyond that. It wasn't serious. I had no intentions or knowledge of running a real business, and monetization never really crossed my mind. It was just something for me to spend my time on. So a couple years into Honey Map, I decided to scale down to one small client. We were just a few months from bringing our baby home when my husband abruptly and unexpectedly realized that he was not ready to be a father or a husband. And one day, out of the blue, just stopped talking to me. As time progressed, my husband gradually removed me from his life, including draining our shared finances and leaving me with nothing but an overdrawn account. So after months of living on my bathroom floor in a haze of panic, it became clear that I needed to adapt my life plan. My entire known reality and carefully planned out future was being swapped for an unknown. This all happened shortly before the holidays, so unfortunately with HR seasonality, or what I now consider to be very fortunately, no corporate jobs were hiring, which was my immediate fallback inclination. I had no plans of keeping Honey Map. I had no idea what I was doing. And so I had to focus with no income and no available jobs. I really had to focus on growing a business and figuring out how to make that work and how to generate income. I was panicked. I had to transition from essentially unemployed, soon to be stay-at-home mom to full-time single breadwinner. I was living off of my one client at $500 a month, which anywhere but especially New England does not get you very far. So to help make ends meet, I picked up a part-time job at a gym. I was commuting over a half an hour each way for 12 bucks an hour, but I was desperate for the extra income, and this was a sales role at one of the fastest growing fitness companies in the country. So I figured I would make the most of the experience and grow from their sales training, which was something not in my inherent skill set. And I was in a very negative headspace. I was recovering from an emotionally abusive marriage that I'd only realized was emotionally abusive a few months prior and was still processing. I was struggling financially. I was struggling with the loss of my baby and my husband. I think more so struggling with the loss of the roles of wife and mom. I was sleeping on a cot in an older couple's office, working crazy hours for next to nothing at the gym. And as I was struggling to figure out my business, I couldn't help but compare myself to other real business owners and feel incredibly defeated. I felt like I had no idea what I was doing and everyone else had it figured out, and my brain was just this never-ending cycle of criticism and comparison. Why couldn't I make this work? Why couldn't I figure out what everyone else seems to have figured out? And around that time, I remember the gym manager telling me one day that they would love to be like me someday, that they really admired what a successful CEO I was running such an accomplished business. And I remember staring at them, a little dumbfounded. I was wearing leggings and an ugly bright orange gym uniform polo shirt. And my first thought was, dude, I'm making 12 bucks an hour telling people they need to hop on a treadmill. I sleep on a cot in someone else's condo. I have one client. I can't even afford name brand ramen. Like nothing about my life even whispers success. And I didn't really give this comment too much thought until I started business networking shortly after. And I assumed that every person in the room was just a kick-ass business owner or very successful in their career. And I was surprised to find out that I would connect with them and I would hear myself in their responses. Things like, oh, thanks, but it's really just a hobby. Oh, it's a fun side hustle. Oh, it's a work in progress. Someday I'll get there. It's not like it's a real business. Hearing these amazingly successful people downplay their successes was really eye-opening. And as I was listening to them disqualify their success based on what they hadn't yet achieved, I just kept wondering, why are they doing that? What they've yet to accomplish has nothing to do with what they've already accomplished in the past. How can they not see that they're successful? How can they not see that they're killing it? And then I thought back to the list of things my manager had called out and thought, maybe I was too. I thought back to the list of accomplishments and realized that even though all of them were true statements, I still felt like a failure because my business wasn't scaling or profiting as quickly as I thought it should. The tunnel vision of my end goal was blinding me from celebrating all of the huge steps that I was taking to get there. Learning that skill, that new skill of growing a business, was overshadowing my decade of branding expertise. And I realized my business wasn't failing, it was just growing. And as I started to think about all the steps I was taking, I realized I guess I am kind of successful-ish. I realized it wasn't my lack of experience or skill sets that was holding me back, it was me. I needed to change my understanding of success. I was viewing success as a destination, like I either camped in success or I camped in failure, and nothing existed in between. But I think success is less of a destination and more of an attitude. So rather than focusing on success and failure as absolutes, I began to embrace this idea of being successful-ish, having some successes behind me, having some successes still unfulfilled ahead of me, and learning to live comfortably, uncomfortably in between. I learned that failure is only failure when we stop, and as long as I keep moving, it's just one step closer to figuring it out, which is ultimately success. One of the first steps for me personally in embracing this idea of being successful-ish was to start referring to myself as a CEO. And this was really hard for me to do. It wasn't just my own internal voice of insecurity. I had plenty of external voices as well, many of which sounded like my mother. And I had plenty of people encouraging me to continue devoting my time to applying for jobs or to work at the gym full time because what did I know about running a business? It's not like Honey Map was a real business or would ever be successful. And as I thought about these voices of encouragement and discouragement, I thought, what would make me a real CEO? What would it take to make this a real business? And I realized I had a bunch of really silly, invalid qualifiers. Things like, I can't be a CEO because I've never been one before, or CEOs don't have roommates. CEOs make six figures and I'm not even fully salaried. CEOs have an office and employees. So I decided to research some other CEOs that I admired, and all of my disqualifiers were disqualified. I found that an alarming number of CEOs who founded their own companies were homeless at one point and built their company remotely, either alone or with unpaid partners, since office space and employees are a huge overhead. Many worked outside jobs. On average, businesses take 2 to 5 years just to get their footing, 5 to turn any kind of profit, and 10 to reach six-figure success. A few examples of CEOs I looked up were the founders of Life is Good, who lived in a van for over a year, Rachel Hollis, who was a New York Times bestseller and built her multi-million-dollar company with nothing but a high school diploma, which took over a decade, by the way, and she was not salaried in that role until just about a year ago. She was completely financially dependent on her husband. Walt Disney, who was homeless and whose business failed spectacularly multiple times, and Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos, who created Apple and Amazon in their garages. None of them had anything figured out. They figured it out as they went, and they all had critics, both internal and external. I think we sometimes have a tendency to compare our beginnings to someone else's middle. Another syndrome just as fatal as imposter syndrome is comparitis. I don't know if any of you suffer from that. The saying that comparison is the thief of joy, I think it's also the thief of progress. It's not a bad thing to look to other people for inspiration, but we have to be cautious of being so consumed with others' success that we miss our own. I was missing and discounting exciting baby steps with the justs, buts, and onlys, sort of the lions, tigers, and bears of the success world. Being featured in my first publication, it was just a local publication. Getting selected for a TEDx talk, but it was a student event that ended up getting canceled. Getting my first speaking request. There were only a dozen people in the audience. Building a freaking business from scratch and keeping it together somehow in the midst of my life falling apart. But I was struggling to make ends meet. Just like we had to learn to crawl before we learned how to walk, before we learned how to run, and we celebrated all of those milestones, building a business or establishing a career, building a life takes a lifetime to build, and we will miss out if we're just waiting for that final step. So this is the part of the speech where you would expect to hear me tell you that you just need to dismiss that voice of imposter syndrome and tell yourself you're awesome. Here's the problem. It's not that I don't think you're awesome, because I do, but when we try to take a rooted, internalized belief and we try to swap it with a surface platitude, our subconscious says, psh, don't you bullshit me. It knows when we're trying to lie to ourselves. And so instead of trying to dismiss this voice, I think we need to talk back to it. So that is what I'm going to ask you to do right now. If you have a piece of paper, you can make note of this. If you want to just take a screenshot of this and do this later, you're welcome to do that as well. But I want you to write on a note card or a scrap of paper on one side, I used to think, and then write on the other side, but now I know. And if you want, you can give your imposter syndrome a name. I call mine Taco because it's loud and obnoxious, but basically harmless, kind of like a chihuahua. And we're going to write down one of our disqualifiers and then evaluate it. So some things have valid qualifiers, right? You have to have a medical license to be a doctor, but those things don't permanently disqualify us. We just need to add yet to the end and make it a goal. I'm not a real doctor yet, but I'm looking into med school applications. I haven't reached my business or career goals yet, but I'm implementing steps A, B, C to get there. Most of our qualifiers are invalid. The only thing I had to do to be a CEO was be the CEO, the chief executive officer, the person who made the decisions. The only thing I needed to be a real business was have my name on the LLC. The only thing I need to do to be a speaker is speak. The only thing I need to do to be a writer is write. So I want you to take down the note card in front of you and write down one of your disqualifiers. So for example, the ones I mentioned were about feeling disqualified from being a CEO or a real business because I had a visual in my head of what that looked like. If you own a business, you're welcome to use that. Yours might be, no one will pay for my services, or I don't have enough experience. Maybe I don't deserve a promotion, or I'm a bad mom. I'm not as qualified as so-and-so. I'm not qualified for this job. I don't deserve this raise. Whatever that might be, I want you to think about what you're disqualifying yourself from, and I want you to write it down on the side that says, I used to think. And then I want you to look at that statement and ask yourself, who says? What's the evidence? And you can use some of these questions as you're having a conversation with that statement. Is this actually true? Maybe is there a percentage of the statement that is true, but a percentage that is false? Can it be amended by adding yet to the end and making it a goal? If it's not factually true, why do you believe this? Where did this belief come from? Who is the source? Are they credible? How did you develop this belief? Do you need to let it go? What do you need to do next? Dismiss, reframe, or take action? And I want you to have a conversation and really figure out where you need to go with it. So my conversation might sound like this. Okay, Taco, I hear you. You're partly right. I've never been a CEO before, and I don't picture CEOs eating off-brand ramen while working crazy side jobs, but who says what a CEO looks like? What's the evidence? And Taco would have to say, well, shoot, Sarah, according to all that research you did, I see that CEOs live some pretty nutso lives that can only be described as impoverishingly chic. And I see your name is on the LLC and you're figuring out as you go, just like every other CEO in the history of CEOs. So I guess you are a real CEO. I guess you do have a real business. And I would say, thank you, Taco. I appreciate your acknowledgement. And I would flip my note card over and say, but now I know I am a real CEO because I'm the primary decision maker and my name is the name on the LLC. Or maybe I'd respond to one of my statements like CEOs make six figures, and I would remind Taco that it takes decades to make six figures, and I would make note of all the steps I was taking to get there. And I might write down, I don't make 6 figures yet, but I've met with a revenue strategist and I've created a detailed plan to reach my financial goals. Or I will go home tonight and pull out some spreadsheets. So I want you to look at your statement one more time and then flip your note card over and write a response. What do you now know? Maybe it's that people can't wait to work with you because you're a skilled expert, or you're an awesome mom because your kids are still alive. Or maybe it's that you're pursuing a degree or certification, or that you have a degree or certification, or that you have the experience of looking for a job. Maybe you are looking to apply for a job and you have 7 of 10 of the qualifications. So maybe it's, instead of disqualifying yourself, saying, I am 70% qualified for this job and I will figure out the other 30. And I want you to think about, what is the actual truth to the limiting belief that you've been holding on to? Because the solution to a lie isn't to tell it a different lie. It's not to BS ourselves and tell ourselves that we can make it when we don't actually believe it. It's to question it until we have a response that we can confidently affirm as truth. And it can feel a little awkward at first, but you'll find the more that you practice this, the more natural it becomes. My conversations with Taco are pretty much instantaneous now, and I didn't know at the time that this would be such a crucial business strategy. I was just trying to survive. But when I started implementing this daily mindset practice, as well as a few others, my revenue and client base tripled twice. And it's not because I was suddenly smarter or more qualified. It's that I was no longer being careless about the beliefs that I allowed to internalize within me. I began to respect myself and take myself seriously as a business owner, and realized that when I respect myself as a real business owner, others do too. Because whether we look for evidence that we are qualified or disqualified, we'll find it. That voice that tells us that we can't or we shouldn't is never going to go away. And if we tell ourselves that we can only pursue success when that voice disappears, we'll never take a step. There will always be people who are better than us. There will always be new things to learn and fail at. And when we accept that as just another part of the journey, we can start showing up. I think we sometimes torture ourselves with this confidence whiplash, and we get stuck thinking that failure and success are opposites. I have my days where I have a great client meeting, I get good feedback, I brew the perfect cup of coffee, and my hair has the volume and luster of a freshly laundered lioness, and I think, yes, queen, you got this on lock. And then I publish something with a typo, or I lose a client pitch, or I curse my hair into a ponytail, and I just want to crawl back into bed under my blankets with Netflix and a bag of potato chips, because obviously I suck at everything. I don't know if any of you are as dramatic as I am. But successes can't exist without failures. And part of what I learned as I explored how to think like a CEO was how to be comfortable with success and failure coexisting, and not losing my head every time I felt myself more heavily in one or another. I have my stuff that I'm great at, I have my stuff I need help with, and so does everyone else. We're all figuring it out as we go. And if I can share one more confession, even though I'm sitting here speaking to you today, I haven't mastered imposter syndrome. I haven't found the secret to feeling 100% confident all of the time. I still don't feel all the time like I know what I'm doing. I still lose sight of my successes and my experience and expertise, and I sometimes lose myself in comparison and unmet goals. But I choose to keep showing up, to be real and authentic with you, even with my typed up security blanket of my notes over here. And I choose to remember that my insecurities and my shortcomings don't negate my successes and my capabilities. So my encouragement to you and my challenge to you is to take a step deeper into your internal conversation and ask yourself, what are you disqualifying yourself from? Is it valid or invalid? And go through as many of those note cards and questions until you run out of disqualifiers. Get in the habit of talking back to that internal voice and ask yourself, who says? And get in front of what you allow your heart to absorb, because every single one of you has a unique story and a unique set of successes and failures, struggles and experiences that makes you the perfect successful-ish expert that someone else needs. You just have to take that next step. Thank you so much.
Oh, Sarah, that was amazing. I hope that everybody else can understand why I wanted Sarah to join us here today. Thank you. And while please type in your questions, I just wanted to say a couple of things. So one, you'll be able to watch the recording afterwards. In about an hour, it will be ready. And so if you want to go back and see the slides and see the questions, that will be available for you. One thing that I found that really works for people is to start by focusing on one disqualifier. So you can write down the whole list, write down, take it out, just write down the whole list and then try and prioritize like which disqualifier has the biggest impact on your life. Start with that one, train yourself and start talking, whether it's taco, whatever you want to call your voice, start talking to it, talk back, and then one by one just move down those other disqualifiers. But it helps to sort of start with one and have really good answers to all those different things that it says to you and really knock down all those limiting beliefs that you have. So, Sarah, I'm waiting for people here to write more questions for us as well. And what do you think helps you, like the moments that those harder days, and we all have those harder days, to pick yourself up a little bit faster?
I think honestly, even writing out my story has been helpful and convicting. I think for me, it's really helpful to have a list of successes that I can look back at. And one of the mindset practices that I started implementing, I call it the 3 threes. And I started making a habit of every day writing down 3 things I'm thankful for, 3 things that I've succeeded at, and 3 things that I failed at. And that was really helpful for me because when you're in that moment, when you're failing at something and you can't figure it out and you're frustrated, it's really easy to be dramatic and just get that tunnel vision of, oh, I'm a failure. But if you have a notebook that has 52 weeks of things that you have in fact succeeded at, and you can look back and see where you've come from, that's a really powerful reminder for me to remind myself, you know what, I felt this way before, but I made it through and look what I've done. And so that's been really helpful for me, focusing on the things that I'm thankful for, focusing on the steps that I have succeeded at, and also focusing on the things that I failed at, because being able to look back, most of the things I have failed at, I have figured out over time and they become successes.
I love this, and I think it's exactly right. And I think sometimes it also gives you that ability to zoom out. You look backwards and you think, oh my God, I was having a bad day, thinking I failed at those things. I was so miserable. I didn't feel like I was worth much. And then all of a sudden, oh, you see it in a very different perspective. And it helps you overcome other challenges later on. So
Absolutely.
Shalma is saying, love this, such a great job. Thank you for being so real and sharing about your own story. Carol is saying, thanks for for this refreshing look at being stagnant. Stagnant is my situation. Also, positive self-talk, extremely helpful. Thank you for these reminders. Jessica, is personal appearance a disqualifier if it gets in the way of success? That's a really good question, I think, Jessica, and I think a lot of that is how you feel about yourself. I think we always have to get to a point. You can see I've gone back to embracing my curls. I straightened my hair for about 10 years now, and I feel good with the way that I am. I think that you want to feel good with the way that you feel and not listen to what other people are telling you. And that is one thing that I think that as long as you're good with yourself, it's good. Sarah, would you like to add anything?
I think that's a great question. And I think it has a lot to do with what your brand is and the why you look the way that you look. I don't think that you necessarily have to look a certain way to be successful, but you may also need to realize that there are certain audiences that would require you to change your look to be successful in that culture. And so I think with branding, from that perspective, it's about finding the culture that embraces you exactly as you are. And I know when it comes to appearance, I don't think that there is anything wrong with showing up the way that I am. I don't put a ton of effort into my external appearance, but if the reason that we are showing up in sweatpants, or the reason that we're showing up not taking pride in how we look, is not because, you know, we're focused on our success, but because there's something inside of us, I think that the why is more important, of really understanding what is the psychology about how I'm presenting myself. And I think that's the more important piece is, do I need to change the way that I feel about myself? And for me, external environments sometimes are an easier way for me to start changing the inside. I know that working from home, if I change out of pajamas and I work in real clothes, it flips in my brain. Okay, I'm actually at work. And so I think that that question is very nuanced. It's too nuanced for a yes and no answer. I think it has a lot more to do with the why behind it, and being really healthy and embracing the best of who we can be, whatever that might look like.
I love that you touch about what we wear as well. I have to say that every day I get dressed. I haven't worn a suit for many years already. I sort of like take that away. I like to feel comfortable, but I dress professionally because I like to feel professionally, like a professional. And I feel like it has such an impact. And getting out of bed, having that switch, feeling good about yourself. And when I show up on video, I feel like, yeah, I'm presenting the person that I want to be. And I
Right.
agree with Sarah. There's a lot. I think that I can tell you, I straighten my hair because most executive women in the places where I've been, they just about all had straight hair. And at some point I decided now that, you know what, we can have curly hair too, as long as it's tidy, but I feel good about it. So it's like, and you know what, if you don't want to work with me because of that, that's your choice. So it's like, where
Yeah.
do you come? Why? So I think a lot of it is also, Sarah, you touched on the why. So it's not because I don't care about how I look. It's because I am presenting, for me, it's more of myself in some ways, and I'm very comfortable with it. So it's getting to that point.
And there's a big difference too between changing our appearance to look like someone else versus making our appearance the best that we can be. I think that that's a big distinction as well. I love watching Queer Eye. It's one of my favorite shows. And I think when you watch, that's one thing that they touch on. They're not trying to make someone over so that they don't recognize themselves, because it's not about losing yourself. It's about being the very best that we can be, whatever that might look like.
I agree, and my dogs have started barking in the background. We're all working from home now. Well, I think that that is the end of our questions. And I really want to thank you, Sarah, for such an authentic, honest sharing of your story. It is always a pleasure to collaborate with you. So thank you, and thank you for everybody else who's joined us. You have our contact details here if you would like to get in touch with us. Please feel free to reach out to either one of us, and I hope you join us in our upcoming webinars or watch some of the other recordings.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.